Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much indeed for attending today, and for people who are watching this, thank you very much for taking the time to have to come forward to the Planning and Development Management Committee today on the 25th of August. So thank you very much indeed. We have apologies, I believe, for today. Mr. Williams, are you happy to announce who the apologies are from, please?
Yes, Convener. Apologies from Councillor Drysdale and Councillor Waters.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, I'm going to introduce the virtual top table as I do every single committee. So with us today, we have Mr. Christian Smith from Development Management and Building Standards Service Manager. We have Mr. Jamie Scott and Mrs. Anne Conliffe, who are team leaders in the Planning and Development team. We have our Vice Convener, Councillor Bob Braun. We have Mr. Colin Elliott, our Legal Manager, and Mr. Danny Williams from Committee Services. As with all things, I have to just remind members of a few bits and pieces. So can you please just remind you that if you have to leave the meeting at any point, or if you lose your internet connection, that will then mean that you are unable to participate in the vote, if there is a vote, on any of the items before us today. And could you please advise the clerk in the meeting chat that you are leaving the meeting or you've lost connection, so that we are fully aware, and also allows us to see when and if there is an issue. For the proceedings today, can I remind councillors and officers to use the meeting chat box to attract my attention. I'm unable to see everybody, as I've said many times. So if you could please put in a Q if you wish to ask a question, a C if you wish to make a comment, and equally, officers, if you could let me know with an A who it is that will be intending to answer any questions that come forward. I'm now going to ask Mr. Williams if he could possibly go through the roll call and make sure that everybody is in attendance. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Convener. So just when I call your name, you can let me know whether you're in attendance. Councillor Anderson?
Yes, present.
Councillor Barnacle?
Present.
Councillor Braun?
Present.
Councillor Gray?
Present.
Councillor Illingworth?
Present.
Councillor James?
Present.
Convener, I've already heard from yourself. Councillor Purvis?
Present.
Councillor Reid?
Present.
Councillor Williamson?
Present.
And Councillor Wilson?
Present.
Okay, so with the apologies from Councillor Drysdale and Councillor Waters, that's everyone in attendance, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, do we have any declarations of interest regarding the three applications in front of us today? Sorry, could members please put DI in the meeting chat box if they have any declarations? I'll give that a minute for them to come through. Okay, thank you very much indeed. There has been no request or indication put forward, so I will take it that there's no declarations of interest. Also, I can advise the committee that there is no request for deputations today, so we are not needing to go through that. That brings us to item 4, and that's the minutes of the meeting of the Planning and Development Management Committee on the 29th of July. And do we have an agreement that there are fair and accurate of the minutes of the previous meeting?
Agreed.
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 Again,
Agreed.
thank you very much indeed. I'll take that as all agreed. Thank you. So that brings us on to today's proceedings. So the first application in front of us is a Section 42 application to modify Condition 3, occupancy of permission of 11-00850 FLM on land north of Perth Airport in Schoon, and I would like to ask Mr. Scott to speak to the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Convener. As you've noted, this application is on a site that has planning permission already, which was approved by committee in October 2011. The change being sought today is to allow the caravans or chalets to be occupied on a permanent residential basis as homes for people aged 55 or over, instead of the approved use as tourist accommodation. I'll now take you through some stills to clarify the site boundary and location and give some context to the characteristics of the site. This first still, just waiting for that to load. This is the location plan submitted for the current application. It confirms the extent of the application site being the same location approved under permission 11.00850 FLM. The site itself extends to approximately 7.5 hectares in area and is in use for agricultural land. It's bounded by woodland belts on the northeast, southeast and on most of the southwest boundaries, and that's denoted on this plan with the green line. Noted also on the plan is the A94, which you'll see to the southeast. Perth Airport is located to the southwest. Dwelling houses are located to the northwest, and farmland beyond these properties and stretching around to the northeast. I'll take you now to the next still. This is an aerial photo which further confirms the location of the site, but this time in its wider context in the upper part of the still, showing the operational area and the settlement of Perth Airport to the southwest, with Schoon further south along the A94. And to the north of the site, just within the frame to the top right, is Balbeggie. The inset image in the bottom right shows a closer image of the site and illustrates its use and characteristics in more detail, with the agricultural nature and woodland visible. I'll show these in more details in photos later on to illustrate this. This plan is the site plan from the holiday accommodation development approved under the earlier permission. This plan is the basis of the development that's proposed in the current application, with no design or physical changes proposed by the applicant. The change, as advised, relates to the use and operation of what would be developed. So the caravan chalet units, which are indicated by the black rectangles on this plan, would instead be used for permanent occupation as dwellings. So in the southern corner of this plan, you'll see the proposed access to the site from the A94. This access has in fact already been formed, which is the material start to development referred to in the report. No other development related to this existing permission has been undertaken, with the greater part of the site being undeveloped. I'll now take you through some photos of the site, beginning with the access location. As advised, this is a photo of the site access on the A94, which was formed in approximately 2014, and this photo was taken not long after that point. The access road would lead from this location in a northerly direction to the right of the shot, which would lead to the greater part of the site, with the trees on the southwest boundary visible for that site. Moving now to photos from within the site, this photo is taken from the northwest end of the site, where the picnic area and toddlers play area are located on the approved site plan. The view here is orientated southeast across the remainder of the site and illustrates well the existing pasture land looking towards the A94. The caravans would be located in the central part of this shot and continue south towards the boundary. This last photo is taken from the opposite end of the site to the previous image, so that's located in the southeast boundary and looking towards the northwest. Again, the pasture and undeveloped character of the site is evident, as are the mature woodland boundaries. This is where the bulk of the caravans would be sited. The access, which I mentioned earlier, would enter the site from the left of the shot, passing the copse of trees just visible to the left, before heading northwest to the remainder of the site. To the right, northeast of this point, would be the drainage area on the approved plan. That concludes the stills for this presentation, Convener, and we're now back to the proposed site plan.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Scott. I will now open it up to questions of officers, and I see Councillor Wilson is right in there. So, Councillor Wilson, could you ask your question, please?
Thanks, Convener. This is really one of if I understand the recommendations for refusal, and I'm not challenging that, but if there was a move to approve this application, how easy or how difficult would it be to implement a condition of 55 and over, age-wise?
Mr. Scott, would you like to answer that question, please? Mr. Scott, I think you're still on mute. My apologies. If you wouldn't mind starting again.
Yep, sorry, apologies for that. The button doesn't appear to work, so I'll do the manual. Yes, so in terms of an actual condition for enforceability, if the development were minded to be approved, that would be something that is possible and has been done elsewhere clearly with the recommendation that we feel the principle's falling short, but a condition in and of itself is something that could be used.
Okay. Are you happy with that, Councillor Wilson?
Thank you. Thank you. I have no more questions.
Okay, I would like to ask a question, if I may. Could I ask officers, as this has changed very much from a holiday place and group of chalets and caravans to a proposal now for over 55s, would that then change the context of it from a holiday entitlement to an actual living entitlement? And as such, would that not then mean that we should have a different form of application? Mr. Scott.
Yes, Convener, as noted in the report, I think paragraph 73 refers to that. So the application is made under section 42, which is a mechanism for somebody to develop an existing approval without complying with some or all of the conditions. That's the context in which this application has been submitted. But that paragraph does explain that there are limitations in what we can and cannot consider within that type of application. And realistically speaking, the development would be changing fundamentally in terms of its character and use from the holiday accommodation which is approved to, in effect, the chalets which we accommodated as dwelling houses. So that's raising a number of challenges. So in terms of the assessment, it bears out there's a number of issues that we consider to be unacceptable, and the reasons for refusal obviously highlighting the fact that using that mechanism to effectively allow what would be permanent dwellings within the countryside out with the settlement boundary, and there's no demonstrable need for those housing in this location. That is some of the challenges, and it would be better assessed within an application for full planning permission, albeit they would still have the same hurdles in terms of the fundamental issues in terms of those local development plan policy issues.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask if there's any other questions that for our officers. Okay, Councillor Wilson, you wish to make a motion.
Thanks, Convener, and thanks for the answers to. I see Councillor Barnacle, sorry, has put in
Yes.
for a question.
Yeah, and Councillor Jones as
Absolutely.
well, Convener.
I saw that, but I'm sorry, gentlemen. I do know that you all see the meeting chat. Councillor James has put forward to ask a question and then came straight under with not needed now, thanks. So I purposely passed that down straight on to Councillor Wilson. But you're absolutely correct, Councillor Wilson. You coming forward with a motion, but Councillor Barnacle has now come in with a question. So if you don't mind, Councillor Wilson, I'll go and continue with the question section, and then I'll go back to yourself for the motion, if that's okay. Councillor Barnacle, your question.
Thanks, Convener. It's quite simple, really. If we go with the report and refuse the application, that doesn't change the fact they've still got permission to develop a holiday site. Is that correct?
My understanding of that is that yes, it is correct, but I will pass that to Mr. Scott for a more detailed answer.
Yeah, that is correct. The 2011 permission they put in place by forming the access in 2014, so that permission is the fallback one. They can implement that should they wish to do so. The applicant has, however, indicated that they're not inclined to do so, and so it may not happen for viability reasons, which is part of the reason they're suggesting this proposal, but that permission is extant.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Wilson, I'll come back to you for the motion.
Thanks, Convener. And thanks for the replies to the questions to Mr. Scott. I think this is quite clear and the report is quite comprehensive that we should refuse this application, and I'm going to move the report. I think the reasoning within the report is well outlined. It isn't just a matter of layout or design or roads or anything like that. It's a fundamental principle that this isn't a housing site. And in my opinion, this is trying to get a housing site by backdoor means, to be quite blunt about it. And I don't think that's an appropriate way to use the Planning Act. I think it's out with the settlement boundary, and I don't think it's a particularly good location, to be honest, for permanent housing, whether it's for 55 plus or anybody else. So I'll just leave it at that, Convener, and move the report for refusal.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. We have two people willing to second. The first one that came up was Councillor Purvis. I'll go to him. Councillor Gray, I'm happy to come to you after that for a comment. Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, Convener. I'm happy to support the points that Councillor Wilson has made and second the motion. I think this is quite a clear-cut one. It's not within the settlement boundary, and I'm confused as to why it got permission in the first place, but that's by the by. But certainly it is very different to be giving permission for this number of houses out with the settlement boundary, even if we accept the point that there is already permission in place for the holiday accommodation. I think the lack of public transport, the pressure that would put on the local infrastructure, the roads network, the GP surgery, that would be significantly exacerbated if this were to become a permanent housing site through the back door, as Councillor Wilson aptly described it. So I'm very happy to support that, the motion, and think that this should be refused as per the recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Purvis. Councillor Gray, do you wish to make a comment?
Yeah, curiously, Councillor Purvis used the very word clear cut. Is exactly what I was about to say. Yeah, clearly policies 6, 19 and 22 are contravened by this, and it's just clear cut that it really should not go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have an amendment? No, there is no amendment. I will open up if there's any other comments that wish to be made. If not, then we will just move on to the next application and refuse this application. We have no more comments. In that case, thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. That's us moving on. That application has been refused, and we'll move on to the next application before us, which is in Kelty Bridge, an erection of a dwelling house in part retrospect at land north of Winchester, Main Street in Kelty Bridge. And could I please ask Mrs. Conliffe to speak to the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. I'm just going to wait for the first slide to come up, but that's it now. I'll take members through a presentation of slides which show both plans and various photographic images to set the scene for the proposal. The application is for the erection of a redesigned house on a site within the small settlement of Kelty Bridge. Whilst there have been several applications over the years, there still remains one extant permission on the site, one that was granted in 2008. So this location plan, which is on the screen at the moment, shows the site of the proposal, marked in red, located within the small settlement of Kelty Bridge. The site, as you'll see, is rectangular, located to the west of the public road through Kelty Bridge, and you can see in plot ratio terms the site is similar or larger than most others in the village. The main change since the 2008 permission is that the site has increased in size by approximately 100 square metres from the site of the 2008 permission. This additional area is located to the southeast corner of the plot and will provide greater space for off-road parking and garden ground. The next slide will be coming up just shortly, I hope. I think we have a technical issue at the moment. I'm just waiting for the aerial photo to come up.
Okay, I think if we could just hang fire a wee minute while we get the technical side of this sorted so that we can see it correctly.
Oh, that's us now.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you to those in the background who are putting this up for me. This is the aerial photograph and shows the settlement of Kelty Bridge. On the larger part on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the M90 motorway, and on the zoomed in version to the right of the screen, again you can see the inset in red, which shows the settlement pattern of the village around it, and again you can see quite clearly on that it is very similar in terms of the plot ratio. Moving on now, hopefully, to the next slide. Here we go. Right. This is the elevation plan for the 2008 permission. So what you're seeing on the screen at the moment is what has permission. So this refers to what I said in my introduction. You can see the scale is substantial, being a large house with 2 floors of accommodation and significant areas of glazing on all 3 elevations. And we'll move now to the elevation plan for 2020. And you can see from here that it's very similar in terms of the proposed type, house type. The main differences you'll see on the east elevation, which is on the bottom right of the screen, there's now a garage door. They've managed to get a garage in the basement element of it. The revised plans that were also submitted during the consideration of the current application proposes more stone than was previously proposed. So there's now stone being retained on the east, south and part of the north elevation, which is quite similar to what the 2008 permission was. Excuse me. While still retaining large areas of glazing, the glazing is slightly reduced from the 2008 permission, and we've got some increased areas of horizontal timber instead. And overall, the size of the house is almost identical, with the exception of the kitchen elevation facing east, which is an increase of about 500 mm wider. So that results in the apex on the front part of the roof being about 250 mm higher, but the rear height remains exactly the same as approved on the 2008 permission. We'll now move to a series of photos which seek to show the context of the surroundings. So this first photo is looking south towards the site. The site is on the right-hand side of the screen, just before the telegraph pole, with the break in the stone wall being the entrance to the site. And then on the opposite side of the road, you can see traffic cones at the entrance to the site where there were 2 new houses recently built, and they are virtually completed, and you'll see that in a later slide. We're now looking northwards, with the site this time obviously on our left, with the entrance just beyond the telegraph pole, and looking towards the nearest property to the site, which is again a 2-storey property and again designed to be gable end to the road. This is the entrance to the site, where you can see clearly that works for the previous approval for the dwelling house have already commenced, with the walls of the garage of the house already built. You can also see the existing trees, hedging and shrubs on the site's boundary. This final photo shows the 2 houses which are almost complete across the road. These have been developed by the same applicant for the current proposal, and the materials proposed on this current application will complement this development, such as a stone finish, but it's proposed as slate rather than pan tiles. And we'll go back now, that ends the presentation, convener, and back to the elevations of the proposed house. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, I will now open this up for questions to officers. Can I ask members if they have any questions? Councillor Barnacle, you're first up. Could you please ask your question of officers? Thank you.
Thanks, convener. I have one main question, but it may lead to others.
No problem.
Paragraph 3 talks about the proposal purely being a change in house type from the 2008 approval, but also talks about the increase in the site area. The Community Council in their submission felt that the development should be treated as a full application in its own right and not be governed by reference to previous consents in terms of what we decide. So I'd like a bit of clarity on that. Are we just looking at a change in design and etc., or are we able to look at this in its own right, separate from the previous consent as such? That's the main question.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Barnacle. Mrs. Conliffe, could you answer that for me, please?
Yes, thank you, convener. It is an application in its own right in terms of it being a full application. As I said in the introduction and the presentation, there is a change in the site area so that there is a larger area now which is to the southeast corner of the site. What we do have to consider therefore, however, is that there is a material consideration in that there is an extant permission on the site. So that house could be built out, which is the one that I showed you as the first set of slides. So whilst it's a full application in its own right and we're determining the application, we have to bear in mind what the changes actually are to what already has permission. So we shouldn't be going back and refusing, for example, on the principle of a house and a substantial house on the site.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Barnacle? Do you have any subsequent questions from that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I'm happy for you to ask them.
Yeah. There's no mention in the report of the enforcement officer's involvement in 2011, because work did commence on this site prior to then, and contrary to the 2008 suspensive conditions, not in 2012. And in fact, there was unauthorised excavations on the site, which resulted in land slippage and the need for retaining walls. So I just wondered why that hadn't been referenced. That's the second question.
Okay, Mrs. Conliffe, could you answer that, please?
Sure. Yes, it wasn't referenced because it wasn't considered to be relevant to the application that we're looking at today. There was enforcement interest in the site previously, but all has been resolved. So we don't have any open case in terms of enforcement. There was some unauthorised work that had started and there was the retaining wall was then put in, but that is part of the permission that got consent in 2008. All of it isn't exactly the same. It's more relevant to what we now have in terms of that full width. When I mentioned about the additional width of the kitchen, which would include the garage area of being an extra 500 mil, that is what is built at the moment in terms of that wall that is on the site.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
any further questions?
Yeah, I do have one, maybe two more questions, possibly one. My next question relates to the CC's comment about a tree survey, which the report suggests is still valid, but we've had 9 years growth in the boundary hedge and the root zone. So why should we not have an updated tree survey which would be consistent with policy 4? I think it's policy 40B. Yeah.
Okay, again, Mrs. Conliffe, could you answer that, please?
Sure. Yes, we went back to the agent on this and asked them to give a statement from the arboriculturist who submitted the original tree survey. So they looked at it again and just came back to us and identified that there was no requirement for any further change, that the roots was still very much protected by the proposal as submitted, and there were no other trees that were required to be felled. And as I say, you'll also see in terms of our recommendation, there is a condition with regard to proposed planting on the site. It wasn't a full report that had been updated. We had an updated comment from a qualified arboriculturist.
Okay, thank you. And again, Councillor Barnacle, do you still have another question?
Possibly, but I feel I'd like to see if other councillors have got issues and maybe I could come back in. It's for legal really, but I just need to see what other people are thinking. Is that okay?
Absolutely fine. I mean, as it stands at the moment, but I do believe Councillor Williamson, you're having some issues with the chat box. So I will ask openly if you have any questions, but at this current time, nobody is advising me that they would like to question officers on this application. So Councillor Williamson, could you just come in? Yes, please. If you have a question, please answer.
Question, convener. Thank you very much. It's about the Leyland hedge. Could you tell me about its maturity. At what age do they actually reach maturity?
Okay, Mrs. Conliffe, thank you. If you'd like to come back on that.
Yep, I'm afraid I'm not an expert on the maturity of Lelandii hedging. However, we have had it assessed, and we've had it assessed from our own experts within the council, and we're satisfied that it's still got some time in it. But we have looked at it in terms of if that comes out at a later date, we would be looking for further landscaping to be put in. So in terms of the design, we've been of the house, we've been looking at it in terms of, you know, looking towards a listed building, which you have to the north, and to ensure that the design is acceptable, materials are acceptable in terms of all of that. So I don't know if that's where you were coming from in terms of, you know, is that Lelandii hedge always going to be there? It won't always be there, but it's certainly still got some maturity in it, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
No, thank you very much indeed, Councillor Williamson. Okay, Councillor Barnacle, I'm going to come back to you again. There has been no more indications of questions. So do you have a further question, or can I move the paper?
Yeah, I think I have got one final question.
Okay, I'd like to ask that.
Before you do that, and it's really for, I would suggest, legal services. I don't know whether other members of the committee have visited the site. I'm quite familiar with it as a local member, which is why I mentioned the earlier issue of I think personally that although it's got a previous approval, I personally think it's an overdevelopment at 3-storey. But
Councillor Barnacle, sorry, I'm going to ask you to ask your question if you wouldn't mind. I understand you have an opinion, but if you could ask your question, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm coming to it because the earlier question also related to the need for an updated tree survey, and we had Anne Conliffe's response. I just wondered if I was to move deferral for a site visit, whether the reasons I just explained as concerns would be sufficient, or whether in fact legal would advise against that.
Well, we'll ask the question of legal. Mr. Elliott, could you come back with that if you wouldn't mind?
Thank you, Convener. I think when any deferral, members have to think about what the purpose of the deferral is. Now, Councillor Barnacle, you referred to the trees, and of course you've had an answer as to how that's come about where there's no updated survey. So I would therefore have to question as to what the purpose would be of a site visit for that particular reason. Now, in terms of the overdevelopment of the site, as Mrs. Conliffe has said, there's an extant permission. And again, I'd have to query what the purpose is. Yes, this is essentially an application in its own right. However, your focus is on the changes from the extant permission. The 2008 permission could be built out. The scale and massing is essentially the same. So essentially that principle is gone. So I then also have to query as to what the purpose of the site visit would be. That is something which has already been consented, and that's the extant consent is a strong material consideration in my view. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Elliott.
That clarifies things for me. Thank you, Convener. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, as I had already stated that I was going to move the paper, but I have also noticed that Councillor Gray and Councillor Wilson have come in. But I'm going to do as I stated, that I'm actually going to move this. I understand the concerns that the Community Council has brought forward, but this is already there's already an application in for a similar sized property. I think the changes to this particular property are more in keeping. I did take a drive out. I do like to make sure I go out and have a look. I've noticed the stonework. I've noticed the reduction in glass from this application to what it would previously have been. I think this is certainly more in keeping with the lovely area that is there. And I think when we do look at the changes, I think it's sensible to proceed and actually put something onto the site that enhances the area rather than having a sort of building site that is there at the moment. So I am moving the paper as stands. Councillor Wilson, are you happy to second that?
Thanks, convener. Yes, in a word, I think this is quite clear. This is an application for what we see before us, not a revision of the previous application. And I think, with all respect, the Community Council and maybe one or two others have been looking at the previous application and trying to rewrite history. That's not where we are, and I think Councillor Barnacle was teetering on the brink of mentioning that subject as well, to be honest. But we have what we see before us, and you're right, there are improvements in the building. It is a big house, but it's a substantial plot, and I think the applicant's at least been direct in coming back with a full application for these changes, rather than a developer that might have done the changes and then come back with a retrospective application, which I always deprecate, to be quite honest. So I'm content. It is a large house, but we've already got a consent for a large house. There are some small improvements made to the overall appearance of it, and I think they're to the good, and I'm happy to second you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Gray, I see you were going to come forward with the motion. Again, I'm sorry, apologies for cutting in front of you, but I'm happy for you to make a comment.
Yeah, thank you, convener. This, to my mind, is a classic example where history of a site does not favour those who object to the development, which happened a good number of years ago, or indeed this one. History tells us that we must accept that there will be development on that site approximately along the lines of the previous application, and this one does not. This one, if anything, enhances that previous application, and I see no reason why we should reject it on the basis that it has an extant permission, and it is an improvement to that extant permission.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gray. Before we go on to further comments, I do have to ask if there is an amendment. Okay, there is no amendment. I'm happy for Councillor Purvis and then Councillor Anderson to mention their comments. Councillor Purvis.
Thank you, convener. And just very briefly, I agree with some of the points that Councillor Barnacle was making in his earlier contributions. I think, had I been around when the original permissions were being considered, I would have thought that this site should not have been developed to this size and scale. However, I do agree with some of the comments that have been made subsequently, that given that that principle has been conceded and there will be a house on this site, I think that the current application that's before us today is better than the extant permission, and therefore, while making the point that I don't think that the original application should have been granted, I am happy to accept this application on that basis.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Purvis. Councillor Anderson, your comment, please.
Thank you, convener. Yes, I'm very much echoing what Councillor Gray and Councillor Wilson has said. I think it's quite good that a developer comes back to us and is open with it, with their plans, and I personally see it as a vast improvement on what was originally given permission for. And to me, quite happy to support the motion, and this to me would encourage developers to, if they have a look at their designs and they decide that you know, there can be improvements, it's good that they come back, because I think this is going to improve the landscape of the area as best as we can with a big modern house in it. So yes, I'm quite supportive of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Barnacle, your comment, please.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I'd really like to reiterate my agreement with Councillor Purvis. There's been a long history to the site. I have reservations about what we finally ended up with, but it's actually an improvement on the earlier permission, which you mentioned before, which is a factor in the use of stone, for example, in what is an area that I thought had merit as a conservation area. There are some really old buildings in Kelty Bridge, and we need to try and make sure that what is built blends in with what is there. Anyway, as I've said, I'm not moving an amendment. I'll go with what's decided.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Barnacle. Okay, as there are no more requests for comment, we can state that the application is approved, and thank you very much indeed. And that then brings us swiftly on to the last item of business today, which is a proposal of application notice in Abernethy, an extension of substation comprising installation of 2 replacement transformers and plant equipment, formation of access track, hard standing, lay down area, SUDS, associated works and infrastructure at land south of Jamesfield Garden Centre in Abernethy. And I would like to ask if the committee have any comments that they would like the planning department to take back when this application goes through. So are there any comments or points of note that you would like the planning department to take notice of? As you're all aware, I've said it till I'm blue in the face, and I'm sure you're sick fed up of hearing it. This is the initial part of the application. This is where the process should start properly, and I'm happy for people to make comments. In fact, I would encourage people to make comments so that we are sure that certain points are looked at. So Councillor Wilson, thank you very much for doing so, and can you put the points across, please?
Thanks, Convener. I'm conscious that there's at least 2 local members in the room that might want to make comment. So I think one thing that I think is really important is vehicular access here, not just on a permanent basis, but also in the construction phase, because often these developments have big bits of kit coming into them, and therefore that I think something important. It's covered in the transport stuff. I don't know also what flooding is an issue. On the site, it's well above the river here, but water courses and flooding would be an issue. And to me, the close proximity to the railway line and the roadway, because they're all cheek to jowl. I'm very familiar with the site, having travelled the road for 60, 70 miles, 60, 70 years, sorry. So I think the close proximity of the railway line and the main road in relation to the development is something that should be taken in particular care of. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As this is normally a PAN application, we normally just take comments for the planning team to take back and process when we're looking, but I do see that James Escott is here and wishes to make a comment on that, and then we'll come back to Councillor Anderson, if that's okay.
Hello. Yes, it was just when you were raising the question of flooding. I think we would be expecting some kind of study to show. Well, basically, according to the SEPA maps, it's not in an area that floods, but those areas, the SEPA maps don't show areas that are less than 3 kilometres squared for water courses, and so therefore the burn is not included in their assessment of flood risk on the flood maps. So there would have to be a study to show that it's less than a 1,000-year flood risk. If it, that I think that would be the first thing.
Okay. That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure as the process goes through, that will be fine.
I'm sorry, did I hear that right? 1,000-year flood risk?
That was correct. That was certainly what was stated, yes.
Right. I thought we were on 100-year, but maybe Mr. Escott could.
It's for the kind of development that it is, that these transformers, plant and infrastructure.
Okay.
It's vital infrastructure.
Fine, okay. Yeah, just the mixture of electricity and water is not a good one, Convener, as you know.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for those comments. But I'm sure as the application goes through that we'll make sure that we put these forward. Councillor Anderson, you will have some points to raise for the planning department to take notice of. If you could raise them, please. Thank you.
Yeah, much as I'm echoing what Councillor Wilson has seemed to jumped in and managed to bring up. Certainly, the area is for access from the main road. It certainly concerns me during construction. There'll be a lot of heavy traffic coming in there. Yes, we've got a set of traffic lights just prior to it. We've also got the cemetery across the road, etc. So it's quite a congested wee area, and we definitely have to be aware that the roads in that area need to be well looked at. I think we need lots of input from the local community on they might have other issues that they wish to raise. I'm encouraged by what Mr. Escott said about a 1,000-year flooding assessment. That would be, I'd be very glad to hear that one. Yes, noise and light. I don't know if that is during construction or actually after construction, but certainly during construction, noise and light assessment for the area. It's amazing how light can travel later at nights, but I would imagine that this construction will be taking place over normal working hours. But these are the main things that we really need to look at and take the local communities' concerns and to give that a degree of consideration as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Illingworth, your comments for the planning department to look at with this processing this application.
Yep. The SSC who own the site have already sent out a glossy magazine to everybody in the community. As a member of that community, I haven't received any feedback, negative or positive, about it. The site itself is on quite a steep hill, so I'd be very surprised if there's a flooding issue. So those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. Fine. Are there any further comments that the planning department can take away regarding this application? No. Okay. In that case, committee, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. And that concludes today's Planning and Development Management Committee. Thank you very much.